Thank you, Minister, and thank you to the media colleagues who are joining us and for the interest in this project. I'm just going to switch off my camera just quickly. So I'm going to just give you a sense of what the Space Infrastructure Hub is all about and kind of pitch that we made, as the Minister had indicated, to the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium, which was initiated early in this year. So the focus of the presentation is to just give you a sense of who is the primary target customer base that we are looking at. What is the value proposition that we are bringing to that target base? What is the value chain that we are proposing to deliver on that value proposition? So it's the how aspect. And there is some aspects around the revenue model that we're still working through, but I'll also talk to some of the issues as to why are we doing this? What makes SANSA the leader in terms of putting our foot forward, in terms of our own capabilities and that of the local industry. So the key focus is on user requirements, and this is the departure point for a lot of the work that we do. Is it in terms of responding to user requirements? It talks to the who aspect. So in 2007, there was an exercise done where we brought in a whole suite of government departments into a room, and we essentially asked them the question, so if we had to set up a space program, what essentially do you want from this agency, the space agency? And that was in 2007. And a lot of that requirements has essentially been captured in the slide. And what we did was clustered into 3 areas. The first area was environment and resource management. And there's a listing of all the requirements that came from government in sort of light blue. And then the second cluster was health, safety, and security. And again, in green, we captured all of that requirements from government. And then the third cluster was on economic growth and innovation, which is captured on the extreme right. And at the moment, there's a whole suite of government departments that are actually using satellite imagery or information that comes from the space agency. And I've just given you a sampling of those government departments and entities that are actually using space products and services at the moment. So the genesis of the Space Infrastructure Hub goes back to the 2007 discussion we had with government departments. So that still remains a reality and a requirement from the government user needs perspective. So this is essentially the user requirements that we are responding to. And I just need to make this point is that if I look at it from a value chain perspective, and we're looking at products and services, the success of the space program is on products and services. The infrastructure that is being put in place is just an enabler, a means to achieving that end in terms of the products and services. So the core is on the products and services, but you need the infrastructure to make that a reality. So what is the value proposition? Why does government departments need this? And this is our primary target segment that we're looking at, given the need and the requirements by government for this kind of information. So for a long time now, government departments have been using satellite or space-based information to drive or make what we call evidence-based policy making. So government is responsible for policy choices, essentially. So to inform those policy choices, you need information. And some of this information comes from satellite platforms. So at the national level, it's around evidence-based policy making. What happens when the policies are sort of approved at the national level? Then at the provincial level, you need to implement some of these decisions, even at the national level. So we look at evidence-based decision making. So you take the space-based information and you use that as a basis for making informed choices or decisions. And at the local level, this is at the municipality level, space-based information is used for planning and monitoring. So for example, if you look at town planning, how many clinics do you need? How many schools do you need? Where do you put your road? Where do you put your electricity articulation, water, so on? And so a lot of that infrastructure planning at the local level uses satellite-based information. There's a secondary segment that I think as an agency, as a sector, that we haven't necessarily tapped into. And that's the uptake by the private sector as well, which we call the secondary segment. But I think it's equally as important in terms of the what we call the market share. We've already got indications in our preliminary discussions with, for example, the banking sector, the insurance sector, that there's a requirement for space-based information. And they require this information for making informed choices around business decisions, what I call investment choices and analytics. And so we're going to also, as opposed to just focusing on government, also look at how do we expand the provision of space-based information to the private sector who actually require. So that's the value proposition in terms of the use case for the space infrastructure. So I've given you a sense of the potential users and the value proposition in terms of what government departments are actually using it for. But how does the value chain look like? So as the minister had indicated, we will have a suite of satellites that will essentially be designed after consultation with our users. So we will go around with the government departments and the private sector institutions and essentially get a sense of what is the key user requirements. And that gets plowed into the design or the specifications of the satellite through our engineering team. So you'll have a suite of satellites that talk specifically or geared towards the user requirements. So once those satellites are designed, developed, and manufactured, and then put into orbit, we get into the operational phase where the ground infrastructure comes in. So we'll firm up the ground infrastructure with a few antennas. And then the focus of the ground infrastructure is to talk to the satellites to make sure the satellites are healthy, looking at the levels of the battery, the power, and so on, and that the instrumentation on board are working optimally. But the second aspect of the ground infrastructure is to ensure that we bring the data back down. So as the satellites come overboard, the satellites essentially move across a minute or 2 minutes over South Africa or Southern Africa. And we essentially have that amount of time to download the data. And so once the data is downloaded, we'll then push the data through our data segment. And that's the green aspect that you see on your left-hand side. So we currently, as the minister indicated, already started investing at the moment 12.5 million, but obviously that will be considerably expanded to look at a suite of sensor portfolios that are coming through from the satellites that we'll be looking at. So that data gets put into the high performance computing platform in terms of storage, and then we have some processing capability where these space-based information is then data is turned into information, essentially your products and services. So your end users, essentially your government departments and your private sector, could essentially tap into this data segment, which is what we're looking at, a cloud platform. And there will be a user interface in terms of accessing those products and services. And then we'll be working with our partners, industry, and I'll come back to essentially how that would look. But effectively, the president has outlined the district delivery model, where we want to make maximum impact or optimal impact at the local level, at the municipality and district levels. And so we want to see our products and services that's coming out of the space value chain in partnership with the industry and other government departments, actually getting into the grassroots level. And that's where the users will essentially sit. And the intended outcomes is, as I pointed out, is delivering on the mandate of government. That's the intended outcomes and the impacts. Just in terms of the funding, as the minister indicated, the funding pitch that we put through was for 4.47 billion rands, and that's spread over 3 years. But just to give you a sense as to how this is sort of segmented across the value chain, 75% of that funding will be on the satellite segment, because that's the most expensive segment at the moment. It's the most capital intensive. 8% will go on the ground infrastructure, another 8% on the ICT platform, including the data visualization center, and then 8% will be on your products and services. So this is essentially how the funding will be segmented across the value chain. But also we've earmarked about 1%, that's about 30 to 40 million roughly, that will go towards human capital development outreach because we want to make sure that we build a pool of capacity through our bursaries and scholarship program that will actually feed into the ecosystem or the space ecosystem in terms of absorption capacity. So we will certainly, as we expand the program and in terms of the space infrastructure hub, we will certainly need more expertise and warm bodies to be working in the system. So that's essentially the space value chain in a high level view, and then also the segmentation of the funding that the minister had spoken about. An important aspect of the Space Infrastructure Hub is the industry involvement. It's not our intention as the agency to do everything in-house. In fact, the model that we're looking at is just to look at the bare infrastructure, where we, as an agency, are taking ownership of, but using that infrastructure as a backbone to support local industry. So we would look at it from an upstream point of view on the satellite segment. We will do the high-level system engineering acquisition management within the agency, and we'll have a team looking at that. But then the contracting will then happen to the industry, where we'll get industry to be the prime contractor for these satellites. And they will essentially help with the development and manufacturing of the satellite. And then we go downstream, when we're looking at the development of the products and services. Again, it's not the intention of SANSA to look at developing those products and services. There's a number of industry players already out there that are developing such products and services. So we leverage on that capacity on assisting us to build those products and services, develop and design those products and services. There's a third element on the industry side, which is the uptake by industry. And that's on the usage by the industry of the products and services. There's 2 points that I just want to make.
You make me rethink the stuff.
Sorry, there's somebody is talking in the background. I can't see who it is.
Can everyone please mute, please?
Sorry, CEO, Minister, can the service provider assist us to mute everybody, please? Thank you. You can proceed, CEO.
Thanks, Ishmael. There's 2 aspects that I just wanted to point out, is that we have set up a forum, an industry forum called ZAR Space Inc. It will be impractical for the agency itself just to start engaging each and every industry partner. So what we've done is we've worked with ZAR Space Inc. as an industry forum platform to establish a listening post for SANSA within the industry. So when we're talking to industry, we'll talk through ZAR Space Inc. So post this media briefing, I think sometime next week, we'll have an industry webinar where we'll do the same sort of presentation, but we'll have subsequent webinars with the industry just to find out how we can work and partner together on developing the space infrastructure hub. So keep an eye out for that. The second aspect, which I think is very, very important, is the transformation of the industry. Okay. We need to ensure that it's representative of our demographics in the first instance, but also to bring in new players as well. So we're looking at small, medium enterprise and development of small, medium enterprises as well. So we want to see an expansion of the current industry base as well, over and above what we currently have, because we think there's enough funding to ensure that over the next 3 or 4 years, that we could have enough uptake by the industry in terms of work to be done. But our intention is not only to focus on the next 3 years, but to look broader or beyond the 3 or 4 years that this funding is being secured for. So we want to look at a longer term sustainability for the space infrastructure hub. So coming into the why aspect about SANSA, why SANSA? Why South Africa? Sorry, there's an image missing there. When we look at it, and I'm particularly positioning it from an African position, we are the only country that has the satellite engineering design capability in Africa. Most other African countries go abroad in terms of securing or procuring satellites from abroad. we're the only country that has demonstrated that we have the unique capability of designing, manufacturing, and operating a satellite from any African country. We also have the biggest and most advanced ground segment in Africa. At the moment, at our space operations facility in Hartbeespoort, we have about 50 antennas. In fact, there's about 20 additional antennas being put down at the moment as we speak for teleport services. And this is by far the biggest, and probably the biggest I've seen so far. Probably have a half a dozen satellite antennas on the ground. And so we have, as I said, more than 50 antennas covering every conceivable part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we operate in. And then on the satellite imagery, we have a catalog of satellite images that go back to 1972, essentially, when Landsat first came on the scene. So we have a direct receiving station for Landsat as an example since then. And we have other sensors in our portfolio that has come through since then. So we have got a rich archive of satellite information in our system. We also have the only space weather center in Africa, so that you see a little snippet of it in your bottom left-hand side. But at the moment, we're currently building a new space weather center, which will be ready in the next 2 to 3 years. And the focus of this center is to provide space weather information to all aircrafts coming in and out of Africa, not just South Africa, but the entire continent. And this is a designation that's been given to the agency from ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, which passed a new regulation that says that before a pilot takes off, he or she must include space weather information as part of the flight plan. There are 3 reasons for that. One is the pilots lose communications, radio communications with the ground station. Second is your navigation signals from the satellites get eroded and absorbed, so you don't have navigation sense while you're flying. And the third is you have excessive radiation dosage when you're flying during active events. So for aviation safety purposes, SANSA will be providing space weather information to all flights in and out of Africa. So SANSA is quite uniquely positioned in the African continent. And we also have the only presence in Antarctica, where 80% of what is done in Antarctica in our scientific base is space physics related. The minister already mentioned a project pipeline of existing funding. So the space infrastructure funding is over and above what I've put down here. So at the moment, we're looking at a data visualization center. So this is a new facility that we're bedding down. The minister spoke around a concurrent design facility for satellite design. So at the moment, the conventional way of designing a satellite takes you about a year to 14 months to do that. With a concurrent design facility, we can do it under a month. So the cost and the time comes significantly down with the concurrent design facility. And then we're looking at a ground segment in terms of additional antennas. But we're also looking at a new station, a ground station at Matjiesfontein. And there's some work that's being done together with NASA with the possibility of a 4th deep space network to support Lunar and Mars mission. But that is still in the study phase. And if there's a formal announcement, we'll certainly let the media know when that happens. But irrespective of whether that we land the DSN or not, there will be a second ground segment that we're looking at with Matjiesfontein. But the NASA intervention is looking quite promising at the moment. We're also looking at a data cube platform, as the minister indicated. And so given the rich history or archive that we have of satellite information going back to the 1970s, if you had to pinpoint a particular location in South Africa and figure out what happened over that location since the 1970s, if you take your satellite imagery as is at the moment, and if you had to process that, that could take you any time, anywhere between 3 to 6 months to process it. But with the data cube, what is happening is the data is pre-processed and put into what is called the data cube. And each time there's a satellite pass. So at the moment, we're covering 12 up to 18 satellite passes on a daily basis, okay? And we're bringing back that data. So each time a satellite goes past, we collect the data, we pre-process it, put it into the data cube, So if you had to do that same exercise using a data cube facility, as opposed to taking you 3 to 6 months, you can take essentially 3 hours. So this is getting into the artificial intelligence sort of space, big data cube, big data set platform, essentially. And then we have an AIT facility, which currently sits with Denel, but we have some funding for the upgrade of that. And so we're dealing with the ministry on the ownership of that together with Denel. And so that's still in the making, but we have some funding for the upgrade of that facility. And as I indicated, we have 90 million rand for a new space weather center, which will be based at our space science facility in Hermanus. So that's where we are at the moment. So the conversation that we've had with the presidency and the Development Bank of Southern Africa, when the president ran the SIDS symposium, or the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium, as the minister indicated, there were 88 projects that were considered to be ready for implementation. Okay. Of that 88, 5 were considered high impact, and the Space Infrastructure Hub was considered as high impact. So from the understanding is that the investor funding is already secured, but there's some steps that needs to be taken in order to secure the funding before we sign on the dotted line. So the project is ready to be implemented, but we just have to validate some of the information that was proposed or put forward to the investor institution. So what is required, and this is the normal process that one follows before one signs on the dotted line, we have to do a bankable feasibility study, just to indicate that the organization is ready, that the industry is ready, that we have the capability to deliver and implement on what we said we would, or what we promised we would deliver on. Then we also have to do a market feasibility study, and some of this work will be done together with what we call a full acquisition management process. So SANSA will follow acquisition management and system engineering process. So the first aspect of acquisition management is to understand what the user requirements is. And once we do the user requirements, that will feed into the market feasibility. What is the market potential looking like? And so that is a validation that needs to be given to the investors. We also need to do a socioeconomic study. So at the moment, I know the DSI has done some work around this, but we need to firm up the socioeconomic study for the investors' satisfaction. And then we also, the fourth aspect is work on a 3-year implementation plan. So if, as the funding comes through, how are we as the agency together with the industry and other public sector institution going to deliver and implement on the Space Infrastructure Hub? So that's where we are as part of the next step. And this is a constant engagement with the presidency and the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And I think there's some unit within National Treasury as well that's working on the infrastructure build programs. So that's the presentation from my side. Thank you for your attention.